His words didn't echo, they cut. Fix it by morning, or don't bother coming back. No discussion, no context, just a man in a blazer too expensive to understand what was actually broken, handing me a blame I didn't earn for a bug I didn't cause in a system I built from scratch. It was 7:03 p.m. The office lights had dimmed to their automatic setting, the kind meant for cleaning crews, not ultimatums. I stared at the error report he shoved across the table, a commit I never touched. A module I wasn't even assigned to. Still, he said it was on me, because technically I was still listed as the architect, because technically he needed a name to fall before the launch. And conveniently, I wasn't on the invite list for last week's meeting. My pulse didn't spike, my hands didn't shake. I just stood, buttoned my coat, and said the 6 words that would change everything. Then, I guess I'm done here. No rage, no last speech, no tears. But behind my calm, there was a fire that didn't need flames. Because what Daniel Krest didn't know was this: you can't erase the one who wrote the first line. Before I tell you this story, where are you listening from? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted at work? Do you believe in workplace karma? Leave a comment if this hit close to home. You never know who else might need to hear it. I wasn't just another engineer. At Nexora, people used to joke that I didn't build systems, I raised them. I joined when the company was still renting half a floor in downtown Boston. Back then, the coffee machine sputtered like a dying engine, and the servers were stacked under our desks humming like overworked lungs. I didn't care. I believed in what we were building. A next-gen AI core designed not just for speed, but for judgment, ethics, resilience. We called it Sentient Core. For 7 years, I poured myself into it. I rewrote critical logic during snowstorms, took emergency calls in hospital hallways, and skipped family dinners more times than I can count. Not because anyone asked me to, because I couldn't bear to see something this important handed off to someone who only saw numbers. I wrote the fallback architecture by hand, mapped the neural routing from scratch, filed the original security protocol the day after my father's funeral. No one knew that part. No one asked. They called me Riley the Reliable, the one who always stayed late, the one who answered Slack pings at 2 a.m. with a fix, not a complaint. But loyalty has a strange echo in corporate corridors. It gets softer over time, easier to ignore, especially when someone new walks in wearing sharper suits and louder words. Meetings shifted without notice. My name faded from team updates. One by one, the engineers I mentored started copying someone else on decisions that used to come through me. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would settle once the launch pressure eased, that people still remembered who built the bones beneath all this code. But the silence kept growing, and the more I tried to hold it all together, the more invisible I became. Then, one evening, I stayed late again, only to find my access to a core module had been revoked. No memo, no explanation, just a quiet lockout. And that was when I realized I wasn't being overlooked, I was being erased. And that's when everything started to shift. To be continued. Daniel Krest didn't arrive with a bang. He arrived with a newsletter. One Monday morning, tucked between a company-wide announcement about break room renovations and a reminder to update security badges, was a short paragraph introducing him. Please welcome Daniel Krest, our new EVP of Strategy and Operations. He brings a decade of experience in high-growth environments and will be spearheading cultural transformation at Nexora. Most people skimmed past it. I didn't, because I knew what cultural transformation meant. I'd seen it before in headlines, in LinkedIn posts, in farewell emails from people who'd once built the foundation of companies and then disappeared without a trace. Still, I gave him a chance. Everyone deserves one. He was charming, I'll give him that. Every word was measured, every smile rehearsed. He knew how to sound like a leader, especially when no one in the room really understood what he was saying. He didn't ask about our architecture. He didn't sit in on code reviews or design sessions. But he did schedule weekly syncs with our design consultants and PR team. The first red flag. He referred to Sentient Core, our most delicate, critical system, as a legacy container with marketing potential. I laughed softly. He didn't. By the second week, the Friday wrap-up meetings I'd run for 5 years were gone. He replaced them with 7 p.m. innovation circles, said it was to encourage flexible contribution. People were too polite to push back. Some even pretended to like it. But the hallway chatter changed. The engineers who used to linger after stand-ups now whispered between coffee breaks. A new term started floating around: streamline leads. A few younger team members were quietly reassigned, reporting directly to Daniel's people. No announcement, no explanation. I started noticing phrases like cost to impact ratio scribbled on whiteboards where we used to track load balancing performance. When I asked about a delayed security audit, Daniel waved it off. "We're not a threat response team, Riley," he said with a grin. "We're a vision company now." I should have said something more. I should have pushed harder. But I didn't. Because part of me was still trying to believe that maybe, just maybe, the system could bend without breaking. Then, one day, I walked into the conference room for our architecture review, and my name wasn't on the agenda. Instead, a younger manager I barely knew was presenting my module, calling it outdated logic, waiting for modernization. Daniel clapped. And I sat there for the first time in my career, wondering if the code I built would outlive the place that paid to bury it. What came next, I wasn't ready for, but I had to be. Stay with me. At first, it was subtle. A small delay in the data stream that fed Sentient Core's real-time decision queue. Just a hiccup, a misfire in the input parser, logged, flagged, but ignored. The kind of bug that usually gets caught and patched before lunch. But this time it didn't, because no one reported it to me. Instead, it was marked as low priority by someone from Daniel's new integration team, a team that didn't exist 3 weeks earlier. I only found out because I still checked the logs, not because I had to, but because I couldn't help myself. This system was still mine, even if my name had started disappearing from the meeting invites. The issues kept coming. One day, it was a corrupted module crashing the test environment. The next, it was a failed handshake between our predictive engine and the new UI layer they'd fast-tracked without proper regression testing. But when I brought it up, I was told it was not part of my scope anymore. So I stopped asking. I just watched. The engineers looked tired. The good ones stayed quiet. You could feel it, the tension behind their screens, the unease in their code commits, like no one wanted to be held accountable for something they didn't understand. Then came the memo. Subject line, Launch Acceleration Initiative. Daniel's name was at the top. 3 bullet points. Refactor legacy architecture, implement optimization patch by Friday, core team leads Adam Sterling, Alex Monroe. I wasn't mentioned, not even once. They were pushing for a demo-ready build by Monday. On paper, the system was stable. In practice, it was a house with termites under every floorboard. And I was the only one who still knew where the structure creaked. That weekend, I stayed late. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed to see how far they'd gone. When I opened the commit history on the core branch and saw Sterling's name on 5 direct edits to my original logic, something in my chest went still. No comments, no review, no version tags, just code quietly replaced. And that was only the beginning. What I found next, it changed everything. It was 4 years ago, but I still remember the smell. Sterile plastic, disinfectant, that metallic sting of adrenaline in your throat when the world feels too bright and too loud. I was sitting on a cracked vinyl bench in the corner of the ER. My sister Megan lay behind the curtain barely breathing. Stroke, they said, sudden, severe. The monitor beside her beeped in uneven rhythms, like it couldn't decide whether to panic or wait. I was holding her hand with one, my phone in the other, just trying to stay present. That's when my screen lit up. Urgent. Sentient core unstable. Emergency redirect failing. Need you now. I didn't respond, not immediately, because my mind was split, one part in that room aching, terrified, the other already scanning for possibilities. I told myself not to look, not now. But then another message came in. FAA monitoring the fault. If we can't contain this, it goes public. We're looking at liability lawsuits. Please. I looked at Megan. She wasn't moving. Her lips were blue. A nurse walked by and adjusted something on the IV. No one looked surprised. No one promised anything. And then quietly, I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I opened the file like I'd done 100 times before. Only this time, my hands were shaking. No tests, no QA, no support team. Just me, one bar of mobile signal and a critical logic gap that could take down a network if left unpatched. I rewrote the fallback sequence directly from the waiting room floor. By memory, by gut. Pushed it live at 3:41 p.m. The system stabilized in under 6 minutes. The board never found out. The public never knew. And by the time I closed the laptop, my sister was gone. I didn't speak at the funeral. Didn't tell anyone where I was when she passed. Because how do you explain that your greatest technical triumph was also your biggest personal failure? That day, I learned what it means to give everything and still lose the one thing you can't rebuild. But back at Nixora, no one ever asked where I was that day. No one ever cared to know. And that silence would come back louder than I expected. It didn't happen all at once. No one stood up and told me I didn't belong anymore. There were no confrontations, no angry emails, no meetings that ended in shouting, just small shifts. A missed Slack mention here, a calendar invite I never got, the subtle click of keyboards when I walked into the break room like conversations were folding in on themselves the moment I appeared. At first, I brushed it off. Launch season made everyone edgy. People forgot things. Schedules clashed. Nothing personal. But then it started to feel coordinated. One of my mentees, Josh, used to check every piece of back-end logic with me before pushing to production. We'd debug side by side for hours, laughing over syntax errors and shared caffeine crashes. Now, he stopped sending me code reviews entirely. When I finally asked about it, he just gave a nervous laugh and said, "Oh, sorry, thought you were off the core thread now." He didn't look me in the eye. Another day, I found out a new internal dashboard went live, a feature that relied heavily on a handler I'd designed, and no one had looped me in. I sent a quick message to Elix, the new product lead. She replied 2 hours later with, "Didn't think you were still overseeing integrations." That one stung. Not because of the words, but because she wasn't wrong. They weren't reporting to me anymore. Not officially, not emotionally, not at all. It wasn't betrayal, it was survival. And somehow that hurt worse, because these were the same people I had defended in rooms they never stepped into. The same ones I'd stayed up for during rollout night panics and holiday hotfixes. Now they avoided my desk like it was radioactive. Still, I kept showing up, kept combing through the new commits at midnight, kept patching memory leaks I didn't cause and never signed. Because deep down, I wasn't ready to let go, not of the system, and maybe not of them. But that night, something changed. Something I couldn't patch with code. And it all started with a whisper in the hallway. I wasn't looking for anything that night. I just couldn't sleep. The office was empty. The air still had that faint metallic hum it always did after midnight, like the building itself was trying to stay awake. I opened my laptop out of habit, not to work, just to look. I pulled up the deployment logs from earlier that day, the same ones Sterling had pushed through with barely any review. His name was all over the commit history. No comments, no rollback plan, just silence wrapped in confidence. That was the first red flag. The second came when I checked his user profile in the internal repo. It was newer than I remembered. Too clean. No visible version forks, no archived threads, and only one contributor label, Trusted Override. That's not a standard role. I should know. I created the original permissions map myself. So I dug deeper. His resume said he'd worked at a wearable tech company before Nixora, but the name rang a bell, not for the tech, for the scandal. I ran a search, a blog post, buried, then a cached forum thread, then a clipped article from 6 years ago on an old industry newsletter. Headline, CTO resigns after proprietary code found in competitor's product. No lawsuit, just a quiet exit. Swept under the rug. The CTO's name, Adam Sterling. But what made my breath catch was the line at the bottom of the article. Seed investor Crest Capital Ventures. I froze. Crest? As in Daniel Crest. Our Daniel Crest? He hadn't just hired Sterling, he'd backed him before, protected him when things went south. Now it all made sense. Why Sterling was untouchable, why his errors were never questioned, why I was being pushed out without a fight. Just enough pressure, just enough silence until I disappeared on my own. They were playing a longer game, and I'd just found the first thread. But what do you do when the people breaking the system are the same ones writing the rules? I was about to find out. There's a certain kind of silence in programming, not the absence of sound, but the pause before something irreversible. That night, I sat alone in the stairwell, laptop balanced on my knees, watching a single line blink on a dark screen. It wasn't just any line. It was the final command that would trigger Sentient Core's full deployment sequence. The build was technically ready, code reviewed, or so they claimed, documentation complete, at least on paper. The system could launch with one more keystroke, but my fingers didn't move, because they weren't supposed to. Months earlier, before Crest arrived, before the rot began to show, I'd built something, quietly, carefully, for moments just like this. I called it the Gatekeeper Protocol, a failsafe buried inside the deployment pipeline. Invisible unless you knew where to look, and impossible to bypass without the original architect's token, mine. It wasn't meant as sabotage. It wasn't about ego. It was about protection. I'd seen too many rushed rollouts collapse under pressure. Too many teams forced to choose speed over safety, noise over clarity. So I wrote a lock. Not one that crashed the system, just one that paused it gently, firmly, until someone who understood it came along to finish the job. Only I never told anyone it existed. Not because I was hiding it, but because no one ever asked. I'd gotten Daniel's digital sign-off months ago, buried in a routine compliance meeting he barely paid attention to. He'd nodded mid-chew and said, yeah, sounds good. Just don't slow us down. So I didn't. I implemented it silently, disguised under update commits, tested it on an air-gapped machine only I had access to. The final key, I never saved it, never wrote it down. It lived in my head and in my hands. And now, as Sterling's patches crawled deeper into the system, as trust eroded faster than stability, that line sat waiting. Not because I forgot it, but because I refused to give it to people who didn't earn it. They thought they owned the code, but the system knew better, and soon it would remind them. The countdown started like any other, 10 a.m., launch day. A full war room of monitors, dashboards, managers pacing behind chairs. Crest stood dead center, arms folded, chin slightly raised, like he was preparing for a victory lap. They'd rehearsed this. Sterling's team had polished the slides, smoothed over the bugs, made sure everything looked clean. On paper, the build was solid, but underneath, it was patched, unstable, and missing one very specific thing: me. I wasn't invited to the launch. Of course I wasn't. But I knew it was happening. I knew the exact minute they'd push the final command, because I'd designed that part too. So I waited. Alone, in my car, in a quiet parking lot 2 miles from the office, laptop open. Terminal blinking. Cursor still sitting on the final line I never wrote. Then at 10:02 it happened. The system stalled. No crash, no warning, just a pause. The dashboard at Nexora slickered from green to slate gray. The deploy bar stopped moving. A single error message appeared on the central screen in red. Error 74, awaiting authorization token, original architect only. The room went silent. Someone scrambled for logs. Another tried to rerun the pipeline. A younger engineer called out, "It's not in the build. This token doesn't exist in any version history." Sterling looked confused. Crest didn't. He looked angry. "Overwrite it," he barked. "We can't," someone whispered. "It's hard locked, root level. It's built into the architecture." A pause. "Who's the origin architect?" Another silence. Then someone finally said my name, Riley Hart. And just like that, the air shifted. Because it didn't matter how many titles Crest claimed. Didn't matter how many diagrams Sterling redrew. The system didn't care. It wasn't listening to them. It was still waiting on me. And what I chose to do next wasn't about revenge. It was about control, but not in the way they expected. They tried everything. By 10:15, the launch team had cycled through 3 different rollback attempts, each one crashing faster than the last. By 10:30, the internal Slack channels were in full panic mode, developers pinging each other with variations of the same question. Did you know about this? Was this part of the plan? No one answered, because no one knew. The Gatekeeper protocol wasn't in the new documentation. It wasn't listed in the system overview, the performance deck, or the glossy press kit Crest's people had drafted the week before. It wasn't meant to be. Meanwhile, the investors noticed. At 10:42, an auto-generated report flagged a critical delay to key stakeholders. By 11 o'clock, 2 major partners had already pulled out of the post-launch call. And at 11:13, a quiet but unmistakable line appeared in the executive board's private Slack thread: "Suspend Crest's access. Begin review immediately." I didn't have to be in the building to see the empire tilting. You could feel it in the digital tremors, the halted announcements, the postponed tweets, the boardroom blinds quietly drawn shut. Crest didn't storm out. There was no dramatic confrontation, no televised exit. His name simply vanished. From the internal directory, from the launch credits, from the product roadmap I once helped design. A quiet deletion for a loud mistake. By noon, I'd received 3 emails, all from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. All reading something like, "We didn't know. Can we talk?" But the message that stood out wasn't from an executive or a board assistant. It was from Leo, one of the youngest engineers on the team. The same kid who once asked if he was allowed to question a director's logic. His message was short. "I always knew the system listened to you more than it listened to them." That one made me pause. Because even when your voice is erased from the conference room, sometimes your code still speaks. But I wasn't done yet. Because what came next wasn't about taking back power. It was about choosing where to plant it next. The email came 3 days after the launch imploded. Subject line, "You taught us more than code." It was from Alina and Marcus, 2 former interns I had mentored, back when Sentient Core was still just a set of hand-sketched architecture maps and hopeful ideas. Back then, they used to hover nervously at my desk, asking questions in half-whispers and triple-checking every line before they dared push to staging. Now, they were co-founders of Haven Systems, a startup quietly gaining attention for building transparent AI frameworks centered on ethical deployment and human accountability. Their message was simple. We saw what happened, and we remembered who taught us to write systems that don't just work, but care. We're building something new, and we want you to help us lead it. At first, I didn't know how to respond. Not because I doubted them, but because I didn't know if I was ready. After everything that happened, the silence, the sidelining, the systems that were designed for performance but not protection, it left something raw in me. But there was one sentence in their email I kept coming back to. "We don't want you to fix anything. We want you to design it right from the beginning." That hit different. No red tape, no politics, no gatekeeping of voices that didn't come with titles, just vision and trust. 2 weeks later, I flew out to Seattle. Haven's office wasn't a tower, it was a converted library tucked behind a row of cafes that had clearly outlived more than one CEO. No marble lobby, no motion sensor glass doors, just sunlight, whiteboards, and the smell of coffee and marker ink. Alina greeted me at the door. No handshake, just a hug. "We're not hiring a savior," she whispered. "We're inviting the architect back to the blueprint." I didn't say much. I just nodded. Because for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was being given a second chance. It felt like I was being offered the right one. And what I chose to build next wouldn't need a kill switch. Because this time, I wasn't building alone. They never did recover the launch. Not fully. The board quietly removed Daniel Crest from all strategic materials. Sterling disappeared from the internal systems without a goodbye message. The press called it a technical mishap, but inside the building, people knew. They knew who had really built the system, and they knew who it had listened to in the end. I never returned to Nexora. There was no grand confrontation, no final speech, just distance, and a decision I don't regret. At Haven Systems, I started again, not with old code, but with old values. We didn't rush, we didn't cut corners, and when we disagreed, we talked like people, not product timelines. And somewhere in the middle of all that rebuilding, I realized something. That line I never wrote, the one everyone thought was missing, it wasn't a line of code, it was a boundary, a quiet line drawn between what we can do and what we shouldn't. People always talk about power like it's in the launch button, but sometimes it's in the ability to pause, to say, not like this, not yet, not until we're sure it's right. That kind of choice, it costs something, but it's also what defines us. So, no, I didn't bring down a system. I just refused to finish a version of it that wasn't ready to stand. And sometimes, that's enough. What would you have done if it were your system? Have you ever had to walk away to protect something you love? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.